So I'm here to introduce Vicki. She's amazing. Like we said, I met Vicki in 2014, and she really impressed me with her planning and preparation and just talking workshop leaders. We walked into the hotel together and were immediately off shopping. And then she came in 2017-ish to do an MYP workshop at Northbridge International School here in Cambodia. And she was doing MYP authentic assessments. And it was organized as a fellow workshop leader. Super impressed with her level of organization. She is amazing. Okay, so that's my personal introduction to Vicki. She's amazing and does good work and is one of the true leaders. She's been championing student well-being and student welfare and for a long time. Before the pandemic, before well-being was cool, Vicki was on this. So what's the official? She's the Dean of Students. She's the Dean of Students at Global Jaya, and we are getting her here to Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So I am super excited. She's moving on next year to ISPP to be the Dean of Student Success. Is that right, Vicki?
Head of Student Success, but very close, Kate.
Yes, Head of Student Success, which how awesome is that? That's what we need. Yeah. So Vicki has transitioned from drama teaching to leading in pastoral care, inclusion, and student well-being internationally. She advocates for inclusive school cultures where diversity is valued and every student can succeed. And I think everyone on this call can agree with that. Vicki's work in promoting collaborative environments has established her as a respected figure in well-being and inclusion, guiding educators globally through her professional development sessions. And I just say follow her. Like just follow Vicki, follow what she's doing, her initiatives, her understanding, her knowledge, and you will not regret it. So welcome, Vicki. We're excited to learn from you.
Oh, my word. Okay, thank you so much for such an incredible introduction. I really hope that this session today, I am able to live up to what you have just sold me as. And thank you, everyone, for joining today and making some time on your Saturday. As Kate's just said, my name is Vicki, and I will be moving to my 7th international school this summer. And something that I've learned about myself as I transition from country to country and school to school is like just trying to create a sense of belonging for myself. And how do I do that when I move to a culture that I don't know and I don't know anybody there? And so my first slide is something that I've learned about myself and my sense of belonging, and just it's really rooted in my 2 dogs and my 2 kids and my husband, although not necessarily in that order, I will add. So that's a little bit about me. Again, I'm so grateful to have you here. What I'm hoping to do over the course of the next 90 minutes is really to try to activate my own social emotional skills in order to help you to feel included and like you belong as part of this call. And something that I think is really important to do is to build in time to check in emotionally. Obviously, being on a virtual call, it's not always easy to get a sense of what is the emotional environment in the classroom. So can I ask you guys to take a look at this scale and just like check in with yourself before we get started today? How are you doing? How are you doing? So using the scale of 1 through to 10, 1 is really not okay. 10 is feeling great. Whereabouts would you put yourself? Would you mind just taking a moment, check in with yourself and put a number in the chat that helps us to understand how you're doing today? Just seeing those numbers come in, it seems like lots of good vibes here this morning. So valuable to create time to help people to check in with themselves. We don't always do that when we're busy rushing around. And also valuable to do this with your students in the classroom as they're transitioning from class to class and teacher to teacher. Just, you know, how are they doing? Help them to understand how they're doing. So let's get started. Thank you everyone for engaging. I am going to ask you to engage throughout the workshop. I'm most definitely not going to talk at you for 90 minutes. I am going to need to create an environment where you guys feel safe and are willing and interested to contribute. We will get started with something that I do in the classroom quite a lot, and that is to use a brief mindfulness exercise. Here's the reason I do it. one thing I've really noticed when I teach students specific strategies for mindfulness is that it really just shifts the focus in the room. All of a sudden, the emotional environment just feels really grounded, focused, and safe. So we're going to try to do an activity today. If you've never done any mindfulness, no worries. This one's nice and easy. What I like about this one is because I'm a very visual and kinesthetic learner, it's not just about focusing on my breathing, it also gives me something very visual and something like very tactile to do. So hold your hand up. The way that it works is you're going to trace the outline of your thumb and your fingers with the finger from your other hand. As you go up the outside, you're going to breathe in, and as you go down the other side, you will breathe out. So it will be breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. I'm going to time us through this just to try to help us to regulate our breathing a little bit, just to settle in and be nice and grounded for the learning today. So if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, do that. If you don't, no problem whatsoever. So if everyone's ready with their hand, and if everybody can breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully, just checking in with yourself now, you can already feel a difference in how you're feeling, and you're focused and you're ready to learn alongside us all today. So we are going to be talking about belonging, and we're going to be exploring that through 3 very specific lenses. We are going to be looking at the Universal Design for Learning framework when we're talking about inclusion. We are going to be looking at the UNESCO Bangkok Happy Schools framework. We are going to be looking at the CASEL social emotional learning competencies, and it's quite a lot. I realize it's quite a lot to cover in the time that we have together today. So what I'm trying to do, as well as give you practical strategies, I'm also trying to give you a heads up and point you in the right direction if any of the ideas that we discussed today are something that you're interested in reading about later. Social emotional learning, I absolutely love. As Kate said, I started off my career as a drama teacher, and one thing I learned very quickly was that if I was asking students to get up and perform in front of their peers at a time where they are the most self-conscious in their life, then I have to really activate my own social emotional competencies as a teacher. I have to create environments that feel safe, and I have to use routines and rituals that help to create a secure safety net for students. So social emotional learning has been a passion of mine for more than 20 years. And I really like to use the CASEL CEL framework. And so we'll take a closer look at that very soon. CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and was founded as a network in 1994. They've got amazing resources, so check them out if you haven't already. A brief look at the CASEL framework, and we can see that there are 5 social emotional competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And what's nice about the CASEL CEL competencies is that just as with all skills, we can teach them. So to some extent, students children, people acquire these skills and competencies sort of in life and as they go. But as with any skill, through practice, you can get better at it. And for us as teachers, bringing social emotional learning into the classroom is more than just acknowledging that social emotional skills are important. It's also about actively giving strategies to our students that they can use as they pursue their own journey into adulthood. So 2 strategies that I've tried to activate already today You can see the emotional check-in really connects with that self-awareness piece. So taking a moment to help students to identify, oh, well, hey, actually, how am I feeling today? And there's lots of different tools and strategies out there that you can use. I like to use an emotional wheel and really help students to dive into the particular emotion that they're feeling on that particular day. Because after all, the more self-aware we are, then the better able we are to regulate. And you can see here, this is a box breathing mindfulness routine. We've already tried the 5-finger breathing routine. These are practical strategies. And the idea is if we teach these to students and help them to learn how to manage their emotions through these strategies, then this is something that they can use for the rest of their lives, not just in the classroom, but as they move on into adulthood. So a really important life skill that we can be teaching. My assertion today is that feelings are very much connected to learners and the learning experience. So I'm going to ask Hector, can you put a link in the chat just in case people don't have a mobile device to hand? I'm going to ask each of you to contribute to this Slido. So you can scan the QR code on your phone if you have it next to you, or you can click the Slido link in the chat. And in theory, that will take you directly to this screen. If it doesn't, no problem. You can also put your answers in the chat. I'm very flexible. So the question is, just reflecting on feelings and emotions, I have added 10 different emotions that I think may be connected to the student experience of learning. My question for you is, which would be the top 3 that you think students experience the most in connection with their learning? So I will ask you to either add to the Slido, there is a link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code. Which are the top 3 emotions do you think that may well be connected to students' learning? And I'm going to purposely slow down and take a breath, regulating my own emotions, a little nervous this morning. So interesting to see these answers coming in. So you've got a little bit of time. If you've not had a chance to add your answer yet, we're going to go for another 30 seconds. The question is, which top 3 feelings do you think are connected to the experience of learning? Lovely, thank you so much. We'll go for another 15 seconds just to make sure that everybody has had time to put their answers in the chat. So fascinating seeing the bar graph changing. Okay. And anxiety at this point has taken the lead. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining in and finding a way to be able to contribute to the discussion. So we can see here then, just let's have a quick scroll down the page. Okay, very interesting. At the moment, anxiety is coming out as the most highly ranked, maybe the ones that students experience the most in connection with their learning. We can certainly understand that. Going to school is a time of their life where they are constantly rated and people telling them, well, you've done this and this is what you need to do to improve. And sure, there's a sense of that continues as we move into adulthood. But for students, it's such an intense period of time where so much of their self-worth ends up being connected to numbers or grades that they're given. So I think what's clear, whether you agree with anxiety being the top #1 emotion or not, what's clear is that emotions are really connected to learning. So if we explicitly teach students how to navigate the emotions, how to recognize the emotions, and how to regulate these emotions, it can only be a positive support for their academic success. Later on in this workshop, we're going to be looking at something called Universal Design for Learning. So you can see here that that is referenced as UDL. If you hear me say UDL, Universal Design for Learning, it's the same thing. Excuse me. Katie Novak here is considered to be a specialist with regards to UDL, and she's done a lot of research in terms of, well, how does the brain work and what's happening in the brain when the brain's learning. And so she really focused in on the centers for emotion and learning and memory in the brain, and concluded that all learning is both social and emotional, which I think is super fascinating. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to set a 3-minute timer. I want us to explore this idea that all learning is social and emotional through our own lens, reflecting back when we were students, and thinking about times where maybe we had a situation where we remember experiencing an emotion, and that emotion affected the way that we learn. So I've put an example from my own teenage years in the chat. Just reflecting back on those maths lessons still fills me with anxiety. So anxiety would be my big emotion in connection with my experience of learning maths as a student. There were 2 reasons for that. Number one, I just felt it was just really difficult for me to learn maths. It was not a subject that came easy for me, but also the students in the room were just not very nice to me. And so that built a big anxiety, and that affected the way that I learn. It meant that I didn't feel safe enough to take risks. I certainly was not going to step out of my comfort zone and try new ideas. So my question to you then, I'm going to stop talking for 3 whole minutes, which is actually quite difficult. I would like you to think back to a memory from when you were learning, identify an emotion that you felt connected to your learning. Tell us what was happening and how was your learning impacted. If you feel safe and you feel comfortable putting your answer in the chat, I'd love to see some other examples from people. If we've got time and you're happy, you can put a thumbs up next to your comment in the chat, and perhaps I can come to you to unmute. If you're not comfortable with that, no problem. It's absolutely fine. 3 minutes. Please, if you feel comfortable, write your answers in the chat. When you were a learner, what was that big emotion you felt in the moment that affected your learning? And we'll start the timer now. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for those of you that have taken the time to put your answers in the chat. A few things jumped out at me as I was reading some of your experiences, just on the power of relationships, not just with the teacher, but also with the people in the room, just how much of an impact those relationships can have on you feeling safe and secure in who you are and your learning. And it was so nice to read so many positive stories where teachers had really being very welcoming and very supportive. And it's in those environments where students are growing and learning. Also very powerful to read those experiences where we felt anxious and where we felt scared. And we know from brain research that sometimes emotions hijack the brain. And so when our emotional response is so strong, then we just can't work. We can't think because the thinking part of our brain stops being able to work. So thank you for sharing. I think what you have shared in the chat reinforces to me the importance of paying attention to emotions because they impact our academic success, they impact our attitudes, our mindsets, our behaviors. And research tells us then that if we are happy and we have good well-being, then we can essentially learn much better. And that is something that came out of the UNESCO Bangkok Happy Schools project that began in 2014. They began looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and thinking, well, hey, we know that we have to create school environments that are happy, where we're taking care of well-being, but how do we go about doing that? And they surveyed a wide range of schools in the Asia Pacific region in order to understand, well, what makes up a happy school? And the resulting report called for education systems to shift away from traditional approaches and instead embrace diversity by taking an holistic approach in order to redefine what it means by quality of education. So the survey results and the trial period of this Happy Schools project resulted in 22 different criteria that if schools pay attention to, then they can create happy schools that are really taking care holistically of their students and creating an environment where well-being can flourish. And out of those 22 criteria, they were able to establish, well, mainly there are three main strands here that we can put these criteria in. So for example, the first strand that you're seeing here, people, the people in a school, not just the individuals themselves, but also the relationships between those individuals can really make a big difference as to how happy that school experience is for the student. And we saw that very much, actually, didn't we, in the comments that just came back in the chat. The Happy Schools framework then came up with the second strand here, which you see as the process. And that's not just about the learning process itself. That's also about the experiences that learners have within the school. So perhaps that's during break time, or perhaps that's during community events, for example. And then finally, they looked at place. And again, this is not just about the physical place, but it's also about the psychological place. Like, does it feel safe? Is it warm and is it friendly? So I thought that these three strands were really important, and it gave me pause to reflect. I'm like, well, hang on a minute. I think that social emotional learning and social emotional competencies are really closely embedded within the criteria that was established in this framework. For example, the framework criteria lists friendships and relationships and mental well-being and stress management. And if we go back to the case or self framework that we looked at earlier, we can see that that's a really clear link back to self-management and relationship skills. So this means then it's an important understanding to come to, because it means that we don't just have a Happy Schools framework, we actually have a framework that we can teach, like we can help students to be able to contribute to this school environment in a way that helps them, but also helps the environment overall. So let's take a closer look at that, because we know already that skills can be acquired, they can be developed, they can be refined. Here we see that teamwork and collaborative spirit from the center section there in the Happy Schools framework is something that can be explicitly taught through relationship skills in the CASEL cell competencies. And that can be done in many different ways. That can be done through structures, for example, through routines, or in a more concrete way through specific strategies. For example, instead of just asking students to go away and collaborate, we support that collaboration by giving them actual strategies and tools that they can use. In this case, for example, teach them how to use the spiderweb discussion, or teach them how to engage in a Socratic seminar, because that way they've got these concrete strategies that can help them to develop their relationship skills, that helps them to contribute to the happy school and engage in teamwork and collaboration in a more effective way. Let's take another look at an example. We can see here in the people category that there is a criteria that speaks about the relationships and the people that have respect for diversity and respect for differences. And we can make a very clear connection back to social awareness on the CASEL cell competencies here. And again, this is something that we can teach. There are specific strategies that we can teach to students to help them to be able to have better relationships in connection with diversity and differences. For example, there are multiple bullet points here that you can read as I'm talking, but a visible thinking routine such as a circle of viewpoints is a great routine that you can teach to students how to use. Students don't necessarily know, they're not automatically born with an idea of, oh, okay, so how do I collaborate? So we need to give specific strategies to help students to develop these particular skills in context. And it's by explicitly teaching social awareness that we can enhance and cultivate a respect for diversity and differences. And it's in environments where diversity is not just acknowledged, but it's celebrated and it's used as a strength, where we can really begin to talk about cultivating belonging. I'm going to just pause for a second and read this quote. This is from the CASEL resources and speaks to this idea of belonging, which is what we're here to talk about today. It says, when teachers build the structures that support belonging and emotional safety, they lay the groundwork for students to focus on learning. Cell teams can support classrooms in creating the conditions for belonging and emotional safety by being responsive to students' perspectives and needs, affirming all students' full identities and establishing structures that create predictability and consistency. And for us as teachers, thinking about, well, okay, that's all very good, but how do we go about doing that? I think a lot of the way forward for us needs to go back to looking at the criteria for the Happy Schools framework. So embedded in the Happy Schools framework are several criteria that are going to give us clues for how do we go about doing this. I think clues can be found in the friendships and the relationships in the school community, that respect for diversity, differences, the positive and collaborative values and practices, celebrating a sense of achievement and accomplishment, that warm, friendly learning environment, a secure environment that's free from bullying, and an environment that uses positive discipline. So belonging can be cultivated, and the Happy Schools framework is one way in which we can explicitly think about how do we go about doing that. And if we take the criteria that we've briefly looked at here, we can see that some of this is what can be done in our own classrooms, but some of this is also school-wide too. So it's important to acknowledge that, I think. Let's just pause. I have used the word belonging like repeatedly throughout, but my assertion is that belonging perhaps means something different to each of us. There's an amazing book called Design for Belonging, written by Susie Wise, and she says, belonging is the invitation to be your full self, however that looks. It is the opportunity, no matter who you are, to learn, live, and love, to be honored, encouraged, and allowed to develop as you. And I think that's nice, but let's just take a moment for each of us to think about belonging through our own lens. What does it mean? And because I'm not always good at slowing down and allowing thinking space, something that I use to regulate my own emotions, is to use these timers. So I'm going to pause for 30 seconds. You don't have to put answers in the chat. This is really just to facilitate self-reflection and self-awareness. I'd like to ask, what does belonging mean to you? What does it feel like for you to belong? Maybe even whereabouts in your body do you feel belonging? So again, this is personal reflection and just building in a little bit of thinking time before we move towards an activity. So 30 seconds, what does belonging mean to you? And what does it feel like to belong? Okay, great. Thank you for, that's annoying. Thank you for engaging in a little bit of self-reflection. I'm going to ask you to be courageous now. We are going to go into a breakout room activity. And I am going to ask you to engage in a discussion. You'll be in small groups, like 3, 4, maybe 5. We'll see how that goes. And I'm going to ask you to have a discussion in this group. Now, I recognize that you're likely not going to know people in that group. And so to turn on your camera and to unmute and to contribute may feel a little bit scary. But I would like you to take a leap of faith and give this a go. It's kind of like a collective experiment, if you like. So I'm going to ask you to engage when you go to the breakout room by turning your cameras on, if you can, unmuting and contributing to this discussion task. And here's what I'd like you to do. You're going to have 10 minutes and you're going to be in quite small groups. And in those small groups, I would like you to discuss together a time where you felt like you belonged to a particular community. Like, what did that feel like? What were others doing that made you feel like you belonged? So you're going to have that discussion. However, you're going to have that discussion in a way that helps everybody in your breakout room group feel like they belong to that discussion, feel like they belong to that breakout group. So what we're trying to find out together is, what do we need to do to make people feel like they belong? So it's important that we try to activate our own social emotional skills in the way that we interact with others in the breakout room. Kate, I know that I'm not always very clear when I'm giving instructions. Do you mind if I can I just check in with you? What's your understanding of
Yes.
what I'm hoping that people will do?
You want people to get in the room, feel a sense of calm and bravery to share an experience of when they really feel like they belong to a group. And that's going to take a little bit of thought, a little bit of thinking, and risk-taking to engage. But you've given everybody a bit of a chance to think about belonging, so you've prepped them with some prior knowledge. So I think we'll be good to go.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. One final point to add is that when we come back from this 10-minute breakout room activity, we are going to be sharing strategies that we use. So just to try to give you a heads up with where I'm going with this, you're going to be sharing strategies when you come back from the 10 minutes. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and ask if anybody has a question. Could you please pop that in the chat for me? Just want to be super clear that everyone's feeling comfortable before we send you off to the breakout room. Kate and I will pop into different breakout rooms and provide assistance where needed. Otherwise, 10 minutes, we will automatically bring you back to this main room. Thank you, everyone, for giving that a go. As is always the case with breakout rooms, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And so it's with a little bit of a leap of faith that I put one of these in my session. So what I had asked you to do is to go and talk to complete strangers in a breakout room and share a little bit about where you feel like you belong and how do you know and what does it feel like. And what I had also asked in the course of that discussion was that you somehow activate something in the way that you communicate in order to help other people in that breakout room feel like they belong. Now, I've done this in a face-to-face workshop space, and I can tell you right now, the room lit up. And so it's difficult to get a sense of what was happening. So I'm going to ask you to just share some of those strategies that maybe you tried to apply when you were trying to help others feel like they belonged, or maybe some of the strategies that you were talking about in your room about how to help others to feel like they belong, or maybe strategies that you noticed other people were using to you to help you to feel like you belong. So I'm really all about the strategies at this point. So we have a Slido. I'm hoping that somebody's putting a link in the chat for me. So you can click directly on the link. Thank you so much for those of you that are already beginning to contribute. You can also scan the QR code and that will take you directly to the Slido if you've got a device next to you. So the question is, so what strategies did you activate, or did others activate, or did you talk about in order to help others feel like they belong? And I'm going to stop talking again just for a minute, just to give you some time to have a think. I'm sure many of you know, but just in case. So when we do word walls like this, the most common answer is represented in the size of the word. I don't want to assume that everybody already understands that. So it's super interesting to see what's coming out as the most strong strategies here. We'll go for another 30 seconds if you've not had the chance yet to add your ideas to the Slido. And if you can't access the Slido, feel free to put your answers in the chat. I'll have a quick look. And thank you, Victoria. Lovely to see you, by the way. Okay, fantastic. It's so interesting. Just while we're waiting for these last answers to come in, we sent out a survey to our Global GIS students this year because we were wanting to write a well-being policy, to update our inclusion policy, and to look at this idea for belonging. And so we were asking them, like, you know, when you feel like you're included, what are other people doing? What do you try to do to include others? And so many of those answers speak to your strategies that you're sharing here. So many of those answers go back to the Susie Wise Design for Belonging book, which I'll talk about very shortly, actually. This idea of just inviting people, invite people to participate and to contribute in some way. And that invitation can be explicit, it can be nonverbal. You know what's amazing, Kate, is I'm looking at these answers that are coming back, is just how many of these strategies are rooted in good social emotional skills and competencies yourself. Yeah. And, you know, it really speaks to why we need to invest in staff well-being in order to help staff to feel good, because we know that when people feel good, their social emotional skills and the way they communicate with others transmits. So if we're feeling good as staff and as teachers, then we're better able to activate these specific strategies that we're seeing here in order to help our colleagues to belong, in order to help our students to feel like they belong. Thank Absolutely. You so much. There's so many great ideas here. So what we can conclude, I think, from this is short social emotional skills. Let's teach them. Let's teach students how to actively listen. Let's teach students how to paraphrase. In thinking back to my drama teaching days, let's teach students how to stand or sit in a way that is inclusive. These are small, tiny little things, but ultimately make such a huge difference. So in addition to teaching these specific skills, there are also classroom routines and rituals that teachers can construct in order to cultivate belonging. And routines and rituals are key because they provide a sense of security and also can be an opportunity to bring all of the voices in the room. So for example, every lesson I begin with a community circle check-in question. And for that matter, for every meeting that I lead with my colleagues in my school, I begin the meeting with a community circle check-in question, brings all voices into the room. It helps to be able to understand the diversity that's in the room, to celebrate that diversity that's in the room, helps everyone to feel included. And we shouldn't underestimate the central role that identity has in connection with belonging. An identity needs to be, we need to create a safe space for that identity to be recognized, to be flourished. We need to create spaces that affirm and celebrate identity. Even simple techniques like using names can just be so important for individual people to feel like they're seen and they're heard in a space. And just working my way through a couple of these bullet points here on the slide, how often do we send students off to collaborate with one another, but we don't take the time to give them the strategies and the tools in order that they can effectively collaborate with one another? So let's teach them how to include each other. Let's teach them how to disagree in a respectful way. Let's give them these strategies that they can use as students now, but they can carry through as they grow into adults. And let's also cultivate belonging by providing space for student agency, by offering students voice and choice with the topics and themes that they are studying. Also voice and choice with how they access the information that they're learning, but also voice and choice with how they can express what they understand about the topic. Because ultimately, belonging is cultivated in inclusive environments that are built on compassion, flexibility, voice and choice, and scaffolded support. I've mentioned this book a couple of times, and if you're really interested in finding out more about belonging, but also reflecting your own pathway for belonging and where you feel like you belong and what you need, I highly recommend this book. Susie Wise speaks to the different places that belonging can be found in a community. And I just want to take the top 2 bullet points here and investigate those 2 bullet points a little bit further. She talks about the idea of the invitation and in making sure that everybody is invited. And that invitation can be the standing at the classroom door and welcoming every student to come into your space. That invitation can be explicitly using names when you're speaking with individual students. It doesn't need to have a flourish. It's simply invite every student. But the next key point is something that I'd like to develop a little bit further. This idea that you're not just inviting everybody, you're giving everybody an opportunity to participate, sure, but beyond that, you're giving every student the ability to be able to make a meaningful contribution. And this is important because it's when you are able to make a meaningful contribution to the community that your sense of belonging becomes even more embedded. The Universal Design for Learning framework is the slide that you can see in front of you here. And it's an amazing way that teachers can bring inclusion to life in their classrooms. It's a way that creates invitations for all students to participate. But beyond that, it gives every student an opportunity to make meaningful contributions to the learning community. Just a little bit of background and context might be helpful if you've not come across UDL before. It began in 1984. And for those of you who are of a similar age to myself, and Kate, I believe, in 1984, much of the learning was done with books and pens and reading and writing. And there was this big explosion in technology with the world going, oh, these computer things can be quite fancy. And so the people at CAS were like, oh, hey, how can we leverage the power of this technology in order to support students with special educational needs? So that was their initial goal. 6 years later, what they realized is the issue wasn't with fixing the student, that actually all too often the learning environment itself was disabling. For example, picture yourself as a student who doesn't always show what they understand and can do best through handwriting, for whatever reason that might be. Picture a student who doesn't always is not always able to read through the text in order to access information. The learning environment in these situations is disabling. And so CAST then shifted their focus to fixing the learning environment itself rather than fixing the student. So the term universal design means that it's for everybody. So any strategies that we apply to support neurodivergent students are strategies that can be applied for everyone. They benefit everybody because, after all, thoughtful, inclusive design makes the world easier for everybody. So you may have noticed I've put the subtitles, I've activated the subtitles in this workshop today. The reason for that is, although you have the option to choose to listen to this presentation in Bahasa Indonesian or English, you may also find it beneficial to read what I'm saying at the same time as listening. Now, that might be helpful if you are partially hearing impaired. That might be helpful if you are listening and trying to learn in a language that isn't your most fluent. But also, you know, when we use subtitles, that might also be helpful if you're in a loud space. So the idea of universal design for learning and their guidelines is that what you put in place benefits everybody. Universal design for learning is built around the way that the brain works during learning. And CAST, the organization that created the UDL framework, they realized that there are 3 neural networks that are at work when the brain is learning. And they organize the framework through 3 main principles. So we can see here, we have the principle of engagement that looks at the why of learning and people feeling motivated and engaged with what they're learning. It's through the principle of representation, which is all about making sure that the content of the learning is represented in many different ways. And then it's also through action and expression, where students have the opportunity to express what they know in a way that best captures who they are as an individual. So each of these principles, you can see here, each of the principles has a checkpoint. And so in simple terms, UDL is built on the premise that teachers identify a clear goal for the learning. And once they've identified that clear goal, they then work backwards and identify where there can be flexible pathways for students to be able to choose their way through to the end goal. So in this way, making connections to an inclusive environment where everybody feels like they belong, the UDL framework, I feel, really fits incredibly well. What I'd like to do is just slow down for a moment and not presume that everybody has had an opportunity to look at UDL before. What I'd like to do is review some of the checkpoints, and we can see, if we look at the checkpoint, the principle of engagement, and look at these checkpoints here, we can see that student engagement and advocacy is activated through learning in a safe space, through choosing a pathway that feels relevant to them, and through developing self-management skills that help students to achieve the goals that they have set for themselves. So in a nutshell, that is what the engagement principle is about. If we move to representation, we can see that when teachers are delivering content and designing learning experiences, they should ensure that the content that they are communicating is accessible in different formats. So teachers should try to connect to prior learning. Teachers should try to slow down and help students to be able to process the information they are receiving. And often visible thinking routines can be super helpful with this particular representation principle here. The action and expression principle is all about allowing students flexibility in how they express what they know, understand, and can do. And this is where it's important to understand what the goal of the learning is, because once you understand the goal of the learning, that's where you're able to find that flexibility. So for example, if I am assessing understanding, I can assess understanding through a drama sketch, through a podcast, through a poster. However, if I'm assessing essay writing, then I need to give an essay for students to write. So understanding your goal and what it is you need to assess is key in order to be able to understand where you can find flexibility for the students. And that's important because when students are offered flexibility, their decision-making needs to be supported through goal setting and reflection. And students must be guided to develop an awareness of themselves as a learner in order that they make choices that have a positive impact on the learning outcome. So it's more than here's some choices, help yourselves. It's more about guiding them through that process and helping them to reflect on who they are as a learner, what they need as a learner, to set goals as a learner, and reflect on to what extent did they achieve those goals. So UDL is beyond flexibility, it's supporting a flexible pathway for students to engage in. My assertion in this workshop today, and I know we've covered a lot, and if I've lost you, I hope that you will come back and take some time and look at some of the resources that have been put in the chat, and maybe come back and sort of click on the links for the UDL framework. My assertion is that the integration between the UDL checkpoints, between the social emotional competencies, the Happy Schools framework, all of that together is what creates an environment where students feel like they belong. And just to demonstrate that a little bit further, we can see that embedded within each of the UDL checkpoints, there are clear opportunities to teach social emotional skills, as well as clear opportunities to activate strategies that facilitate a sense of belonging. So if we look at this example here, this is taken from the engagement principle, and this is all about recruiting interest. The first checkpoint is about optimizing individual choice and belonging. So by providing options to select from, we provide each student with an invitation to participate and experience success. And if you remember, this goes back to the book Design for Belonging, where we're giving opportunities for students to be able to find success in their way and whatever that looks like. Additionally, in offering students choice, we're also able to teach them the social emotional competencies of self-awareness and responsible decision-making. So what I'm hoping that you can see from this image on the screen, it uses icons that denote social emotional learning and belonging, and they show how and where these are embedded within these particular UDL checkpoints. And overall, the image demonstrates that the UDL checkpoints are saturated with opportunities to teach social emotional skills and cultivate belonging. We are getting to the end of our time together today, which is amazing. I have so enjoyed guiding us through this discussion. What I really wanted to do was to show how cultivating belonging, I wanted to demystify it. I wanted us to leave this workshop thinking, oh, hey, I can cultivate belonging in my classroom with my own social emotional skills. I can cultivate belonging in the classroom by teaching social emotional skills to my students and by building in rituals and routines for my students to be able to thrive in. I can cultivate belonging by creating flexible pathways and providing students with voice and choice in order that they can participate in a meaningful way and find success. I'd like to remind you all that happy students are students that are more likely to be academically successful. Ultimately, the research that's coming out of the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford indicates that investing in wellbeing practices will have a positive, long-lasting impact on our students. And that investing in well-being practices, which is what we're really talking about with the Happy Schools framework, doesn't come as a cost. There's only benefits to be gained from doing this. So we are coming to the last slide. I feel like I've done more talking than I would usually, so I am going to pause for a second and just ask for you guys, could you please pop something in the chat? What is your takeaway? Like a big takeaway, something that you're going to think about. Maybe it's about yourself and connected to where you feel like you belong and what belonging feels like to you. Maybe it's about UDL. Maybe this is new for you. Maybe you're going to look at the Happy Schools framework. I would so love to hear from each of you about what is your biggest takeaway. And what I'm hoping is to take some of these ideas and maybe move into a little bit of a Q&A. We have a little bit of time left where we can open up a conversation and yeah, just round out our time together by connecting a little bit more informally. So I will stop talking. I haven't got a timer, but I've got Kate who's going to look at me and tell me to stop talking if I don't. What are your big takeaways going to be from our 90 minutes together today?
And Vicky, sometimes I think to get people started, it's good to hear an example. Is it okay if I go ahead and give an example?
Oh, yes, I'd love that, Kate. Thank you.
So, one of the strategies I tried to use when you guys were entering the room and then I fell down is I tried to use everybody's name. So I said, welcome. And I think when you feel welcomed, instead of just like a welcome everyone, just welcome. And then I learned really very quickly, you could use the @ sign and it would spell your names appropriately. So that was one of the strategies I used. So I think just, I'm going to take that. I have a huge staff and I've memorized the guards' names. We just got new cleaners. I need to learn their names, but I still don't have every student and staff's name down. So I think names is really one, but, about belonging. I really feel that, Vicky, that you created a sense of belonging here for me. You welcomed me. The first thing you talked about was our connection when you were here in Phnom Penh. You developed a connection with me. So I felt a belonging straight from the start. And then I think there's some kind of magic that happens when we just set the intention. Like when there's just the intention that I am going to create a sense of belonging, because what people may or may not know about me is I'm writing a book, and later today I'm presenting on humanizing education. And a deep reason I feel connected to this presentation today is that it goes with my own personal mission and belief. And that's serendipity. And so I think if we set the intention to have inclusive environments, there's things that can happen serendipitously that we don't plan.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And thank you for chipping in. If I can share, I think cultivating belonging in a virtual environment is challenging. It's really challenging. There are things that you can do, but I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us in Indonesia who were here during the pandemic. We were online for a really, really long amount of time. And the research into camera use changed during the pandemic. Initially, it was there's such a thing as camera fatigue, allow people to keep their cameras off. And something that I learned for myself during that time. So we allowed that flexibility because I do believe flexibility and compassion really set the foundation for a compassionate and inclusive school. So we created the stage where students were able to engage by the chat or turn on their camera. And of course, students turned off their camera. And I think that what I had inadvertently created was a situation where students lost that connection. They lost that sense of belonging. And as those of you who were not able to turn your camera on, or if you've had an experience where you're trying to engage people in a virtual environment and their camera's off, when we lose that ability to see people's faces and really understand the nuance of what's being communicated, then we lose that, there's a massive disconnect, and we lose that connection to that person. And so if I was to do the pandemic all over again, I hope not, if I was to do that all over again, I would definitely have a different viewpoint on the use of cameras, because so much of belonging is cultivated in those relationships. And how can you build relationships with an icon on a screen? Certainly possible, but just not in the same way. I'm just looking at some of the notes in the chat. The whole name thing is important. It reminds me when I lead face-to-face workshops on inclusion, I don't always get the time to do this, but often at the end of that day one, I will know everyone's name. Like I will make sure I know everyone's name, and I will write a sticky note to every individual that celebrates something about what they have contributed during that day. And so the next morning starts off, I've got like little folded up notes that I'm passing, and you see people flourish in front of you, just feeling seen and heard. And so somebody had wrote, yes, but what if you don't have a good memory? I hear you. I totally hear you, because so much of my name building is based on what people are wearing. And so when they come into the workshop the next day, I'm like, no, you were in pink yesterday and now I've completely forgotten. It's something I have to work on. But, you know, that's why I have them have, you know, name tags on the desk, or like I know what I need in order to be able to use their names. And so I apply those strategies so that I can use their names, because I know it's going to pay off. I know it's going to help them to learn better. I know it's going to help them to feel more connected and good about themselves in that workshop experience. Do you have similar strategies, Kate, that you have used in your workshops, for example, or with your students?
Oh, yeah. For inclusion, and some of the people on this call have been in my workshops in Indonesia. And I want to tell you two. One is the workshop, you know, we have like the debrief the day before. And the debrief that day was on how to start off with an inclusion icebreaker. And we separated into north, south identities. And I don't know, I was in the, I think it was north or something. It was in the go, or maybe south. It was the go-getter, the people that just do it. And so
you're definitely a northerner.
Yeah. So we created one where you introduce yourself by saying your name. Hi, my name is Kate. Actually, my full name's Catherine. And I got my nickname Kate when in a time when there was this TV show called Kate and Allie. And I really didn't want to be called Kathy. And everybody wanted to shorten my name, Catherine, to Kathy. And so people who knew me thought Catherine was way, way, way too formal for my personality. And they're like, my seventh grade volleyball team and basketball team, they're like, we have to have a name for you. And so my friend and I decided on Kate. And so we developed stories like that about our names. And that was the introduction icebreaker that I did then and have done in other workshops, which I really love. Another thing that I like to do is have groups already created and up on the wall. So with it, when you walk in, your name's everywhere. You know, like it's these three people, you know I'm going to be a part of a red group and I'm going to be a part of a square circle, you know, so that it makes you feel like you belong.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those, Kate. I just wanted to pick up, there's several people just in the chat about UDL, and it's yeah, definitely seems to be new for some people. It's definitely gathering steam, I would say. The call to action around universal design for learning is getting louder and louder. And one thing I really appreciate about universal design for learning, like I'm 4 or 5 years into my journey now, so I don't consider myself to be an expert. I'm still learning. But what I like about it is that it's so accessible, because I think when we look at differentiation, for those of us who maybe are trained with a specialist, for example, I'm a theatre teacher, maybe previously I would have thought, oh, like, but that's not my area. I'm not really sure how to differentiate or like how to be inclusive. So what UDL does is it demystifies that and it breaks it down into such easy and accessible chunks that take very little time. Again, something I hear from teachers and I totally understand is, but I don't have time to differentiate. But this is where UDL can be part of the answer. Because if you're able to understand your learners, to figure out you know, who they are, what are they interested in? Like, can you take their interest in skateboards and build that into their math process learning, for example? I promise you that learning is going to be so much more engaging for that student if they have the opportunity to explore. And this is where I'm going to show you I know nothing about maths. Like that, if they can explore that through skateboarding, if that's something they're interested in, than if they're just getting it dry. So it doesn't take much time to find out what are your students interested in and give them a voice. Like, how do you want to learn this? And how can you express this? Just that flexibility takes very little time and is not difficult to do, but can have such a massive impact on the learners in the classroom, because all of a sudden engagement goes up. And we know that when students are engaged, then all sorts of things are activated, they're motivated, they're purposeful. It's a win-win, Kate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the other toddle ties that I moderated was with a woman that is a radical candor coach. And then I did a diversity, equity, and inclusion panel for the American Chamber of Commerce. And she made a video, like a 5-minute video for us. And she said, where do you start with diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging? You start with somebody's name and we're all different cultures in our international school settings. And she said, and you get the name right. And you ask, what do people want to be called? So like as a head of school, I sent out a survey at the beginning of the year saying, obviously I know all your names from your contracts and all the staff lists, but what do you actually want to be called? And I think that's a really powerful way to start if you can take one thing away. And then the other thing is just UDL is like kind of like an umbrella that makes it possible for inclusion. In the IB, we talk about removing barriers to learning. And if you think of an umbrella and the rain is all the barriers raining down, it just kind of protects us to remove those barriers.
That's such a good point about barriers to learning. I just wanted to pick up, and speaking about names, I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing this right. Is it Iga or Ega? Please feel free to unmute and let me know how to pronounce your name correctly.
It's called Ega.
Ega, Ibu Ega.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Ega, for your question. So Ibu Ega was asking about universal design for learning and differentiation, like kind of like best friends. Yes, absolutely. That is such a nice way to put it. And what I will also throw in as a third wheeler, so the third person in the friendship, is something that we call inclusive access arrangements. So for students, who they have to be assessed on writing an essay, and we know that they have a barrier to learning that is going to make that difficult for them. So sometimes we can put in place inclusive access arrangements, for example, where they can use a computer to be able to type their responses, or somebody can scribe their responses for them. So maybe I'll keep that for a different toddle presentation, but there is a third bedfellow. Ibu Eka, thank you so much for writing a question and for engaging in the chat. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you so much, Boo. So we've got 3 minutes. Does that mean we have time to take a question if somebody wants to unmute, Kate?
Absolutely. 1 question and 1 answer.
Do you know what? I think we have gotten to a point, just looking at the answers in the chat, I really get the sense of, that combination, the intersection between social emotional learning and universal design for learning. It's there so explicitly. And so definitely worth looking at. There's tons of resources for social emotional learning at the CASEL website. It gives you ideas for classroom routines you can put in place. For example, I definitely recommend checking it out. And similarly, there are so many online resources for universal design for learning. If you're interested in doing this in your schools, a resource that I really recommend is an online theory into practice book. You have to sign up. It's a free account. But once you sign up, you can read about universal design for learning in a universal design for learning platform. So that means that you can expand ideas, you can watch videos instead of reading text, you can annotate text. So if this is something that you're interested in, it's really sparked something in you, my first step is to recommend go and sign up for that and read your way through it, and then reflect on the impact it has on you as a learner, because that's what's going to be powerful, is you then bring that into their classroom. We are at 11:29, Kate. I can see one hand's just gone up for a question. Maria, do I have time to take a question, Kate?
Just a really quick one.
I
Okay,
think
so you
take it, you'll be fine.
okay, you were saying that, we send students off to collaborate and we don't actually teach them how. Is there a resource that you would recommend for how we could teach social skills like that?
One of my go-tos is the Project Zero visible thinking routines. It has some really good structures in order to support that collaborative thinking process. So if this is something that is new for you, that would be a starting point that I would recommend, because it has very clear guidance and structures for collaboration that has different purposes. So Project Zero, the visible thinking routines, have a browse through those. I think you'll find that's helpful. Kate, I've had one more question. Can I take it or no?
I don't know, Ekta. I think we need to give everyone a break. Maybe you can post your email in the chat and people can email you and keep in touch with you, and maybe even invite you as a workshop leader to their school.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I do quite often. I'll put it in the chat.
And the other thing we want to know, Vicky, is just the place where you sign up and get a free account. What was that resource?
Yes, it's called Theory into Practice, I want to say, UDL Theory and Practice, something along those lines. I will try to find the link and put it in the chat while I'm still here.
Okay, so with that, we're going to move in. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation, for being risk takers, and giving it your all here. The more you put in, the more you get out. We are now taking a 15-minute break, but also having a toddle demonstration. Right, Ekta?
Yes, we've got Brady on the call. Brady, if you can take over.
I'm happy to. Thank you, everybody. I know you've been in your sessions for a while. Obviously, if you need to stand up and take a break, totally allowed to. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Toddle, I'm going to take the next 12, 13 minutes or so just to give a whirlwind tour with some specific highlights around MYP, more inclusive use of Toddle to help you with things like UDL, and just see how it works with MYP. And so let's do that right now. And if you've not heard about Toddle before, it is an all-in-one learning platform, and it's designed by IB educators for IB educators. And before joining Toddle, I spent about 20 years as an IB educator, some of that time as a PYP coordinator, also as an MYP teacher. And my goodness, when I was an MYP teacher, I really wish I'd had Toddle. It would have really been great for me. So let me show you why I love Toddle, and I think you will too. So right off the bat, you can see it's a nice clean interface. There's way too many things here. I can't show them all to you. We got, like, for example, great Toddle library of exemplar units and learning experiences. We have really powerful basic kind of administrative tools, like sending announcements to other staff members, or sending announcements to your class, or sending announcements to parents. And so we have all those features. We've got messaging, attendance can all be done on the platform. If your school has an authorization or an evaluation coming up, we have a module that supports that and really makes it easier. I desperately wish when I was an IB coordinator that I'd had that as well. But let's get into some of the MYP specific things, like, for example, the personal project. As you know, the administering of the personal project is half of the work for both you as teachers and for the students, so that they don't lose track of what they need to do and the deadlines. We make it really simple with a nice dashboard over here. The supervisors see just their own students, and I can see here right away where every student is in the process. Let's only look at ones that are maybe not quite there. Okay, Maria, let's pick on Maria and see what's going on with Maria. I can look into this and I can see all the elements of her project right here and go through this. And what's really great about Toddle compared to some other platforms is that what you see as a teacher is the same thing that the student sees. So it's really easy to support them. I've got the IB guidance right here telling me what the directions are straight from the IB. So whether you're a student or a teacher that's new to being a supervisor, you've got everything you need right there for you. All the process journal, just add it like social media. Of course, every student knows how to do that. We go through all the reports, mark as complete, download the forms, do our assessment, all integrated perfectly. So this really can make your life, and probably more importantly, the student's life, way easier. Something I really love is the fact that we can create deadlines for the personal project, as well as any other assessment, formative assessment, summative assessments in your class. And those flow all the way into a shared school calendar. So if I go to calendar here, I don't know if I have any great examples at the moment, but any summative assessment or formative assessment in any class can show up here. So you have an automatic exam calendar created for you, as well as the personal project deadlines would be showing up here as well. So that's a real game changer. If you're in a school where you're manually creating an exam calendar, which doesn't necessarily get stuck to, or you're arguing about stuff, it's all right there. The teachers can see it, the students can see it as well. The parents can see it. So let's go down now to what it's like to be a MYP teacher. I'm going to choose MYP first year of design because that's the one that I taught most recently. We do support IDUs. We can see this in timeline view. We can see all the elements of the MYP as well. I'm going to go into the logo and branding unit. Maybe there's somebody here on the call that's actually taught a unit just like this. I've got a nice overview of the unit, but if I click inside, I can go through all the planning process step by step of an MYP plan. If I take, for example, the statement of inquiry, I can really easily click again here and see the IB guidance. What in the world is a statement of inquiry? It's right here. And maybe you have a team working on this. We have the comments. So this is a comment that's connected to here, so you can kind of have a sidebar conversation with the more formal documentation. Tag the specific MYP objectives, and maybe at your school, you're also required to align with another set of subject standards. Maybe it's a national curriculum, maybe it's something else. We can set that all up for you so that you have your standards there and you can target them. So once you have the unit created, you can go into the unit flow, and this is where you create the individual learning experiences, the formative assessments, and all of that. So we're going to create a new one, but actually before we create a new one, let's look at an existing one that I've already made. And we're just talking about UDL, and I just want to show you what we can do with AI to help us take our existing lessons and make them even better. So here is one that I've got, and I marked it for myself to say, let's improve this one. And it's okay. It's got a resource, it has a goal and a process, but let's see if we can make it better. I'll click edit. And because it's an existing one, I have the AI over here, and these first two, evaluate this learning experience and generate ideas for improving it. So right here, I can click on this and it's going to evaluate this for me. What's really amazing about our AI is that it's trained on progressive education. So it already knows that it's teaching MYP design. It knows what the unit is and what the syllabus content is that's been targeted in this unit. So I don't have to be some kind of AI maestro to get amazing results. So check this out. It's given me a lot of feedback. It sees the learning goals, it's reflecting on those. It highlights two things that are pretty good about this learning experience, and then gives me a whole bunch of ideas of how I might make it better. So incorporate inquiry, real world connection, varied assessment. I like all those ideas. That's super. If I start from scratch though, I'll show you the other way I could go. I could say improve this learning experience in a specific way. So it's going to ask me, what specific way do you want to do that? Let's use UDL. And of course, it can write lessons from scratch using UDL if you want it to. So right away, we've taken what is an okay, at least outline of a lesson, and reimagined it with UDL principles in mind. So even if you're not a UDL expert, this is a great way to scaffold your understanding and kind of get used to the format. And wow, this is such a huge improvement. I'm going to click Add to Learning Experience, and it's going to copy it over, and I've improved the lesson just like that. So whether I'm working on a lesson that I've already created and I'm improving, or starting from scratch, I have this AI assistant to help me. And again, whether it's new or I'm improving one, I can do my very, very favorite thing to do with Toddle AI is create MYP rubric. So all of you have created rubrics, you've done your task-specific clarifications. It takes a long time, right? So it's going to just clarify which ones I want to focus on. So maybe for the students, I really only want to focus on these two for today. So it's going to create this rubric for me. And it's using the existing MYP criteria, but it's creating the task-specific clarifications for me on the fly. So you know how long this takes. This could have just saved you 45 minutes. And I'm going to click Add to Criteria-Based Rubric, and it'll copy it over into here for me. I'll close the AI now, and here's this rubric. I could still edit it and make changes if I want to, and I can have the student self-assess as well as me, because what's great about our learning experiences here are that they also can be the template that you share with the student and they interact with you. So I've got my UDL lesson, and now I want to add a submission template. I can have maybe a Google Doc, just like Google Classroom, where it creates a copy and automatically shares it back to you for every student. We've got that workflow. I also can create a workbook. This is a little bit more of an inclusive way to do it as well, because instead of saying the only kind of answer I really want from you is a typed answer, we could have it be more of an open scrapbook kind of thing. This could be blank for the students, or I could create something here and have them respond to it. Maybe it's a table, or maybe it's a map of the world, and I'm asking them to mark it up and record themselves talking about that map. Really flexible, really powerful. And of course, you as a teacher could use the same tool to give them feedback. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. One other little step I'll show you is that we can tag the specific learning goals. So maybe my coordinator keeps talking about targeting the ATLs a little bit better. So I will target a particular ATL here. And we have the flexibility, if you wanted to, you could even rate the students specifically on that ATL or on these specific subject objectives, or even add a particular content standard. For example, if you have a national curriculum content standard that you need to target here, you could go in and you could target that well. So lots of assessment options, really flexible. Probably you won't use all of these, but your school will use some of them, and we can support that for you. So when I've got that done, it's easy for me to share this with my students, assigned to students. If I have multiple sections of the class, I could add multiple sections, and it shows up for the students right away. And what's really great is just in a few clicks, I can come over to the class stream, and I can see all the work that I've sent out to the students, and I can mark them on it. So if I go down to, let's do this one here, I can see these are my students, this is their submitted work, and here's my assessment tools. Again, these are more assessment tools than you're probably going to have, but you can see how much flexibility there is. So I'll look at Brad's work. He submitted 2 pieces. One was the workbook, so I can give him feedback in the same way. I could write on this, I could click record, start marking it up and talking to Brad about his assignment, and then he would get that as his feedback. I can also do private messages and record my audio as well. Request resubmission if I need to. And of course, mark against these rubrics that I've created. If I don't remember what the task-specific clarifications are, there they are right there. And what I really love is that this is all integrated, right? So it started from the unit plan to the learning experience. Now I've marked the student using the same criteria and objectives that I had targeted at the unit level. And that flows through to my marking and can show up both in the student's portfolio for the parents to see it, but also flows directly into your grade book. So I've got my assessment grade book. I can see all of the marks the student has. I can go in there and change them very easily. And I can look at it in the learning goals view, which is personally my favorite, where I can see every single subject standard or ATL and see the progress over time. And of course, all this criteria, all the names of these things like evolving, all of that's customizable. So it'd be the language that your school uses. And all of this, last thing I'll show you is that this all flows straight through to your report cards too. So it's all an integrated system. I can go into here, and all of those marks can flow through automatically into Brad's report. I could even use the AI to write the comment for me, because the AI can read every single assignment that Brad got, every mark that he got in his grade book, every comment, it all is represented right here. So you get a really lovely comment that just needs a little tiny bit of revision, and then you can move on to the next student. So that is a whirlwind overview. And I think I just want to show you one last thing. It'll just take another 30 seconds or so. And that is, what does it look like on the mobile app? Because we keep talking about being inclusive, and part of that is language, right? So I'm going to show you what it looks like for a parent view, accessing their and seeing their students' work. So I'm going to share a recording of my phone here. So I'm going to go into the family app. I can see all of my children in the family app, regardless of what program they're in. This is a PYP student, and I can scroll down and I can look at the announcements, and it will automatically translate into whatever language the user has on their phone. So in this case, this is Japanese. Same thing with any of the comments or reflections or that are put onto the student's portfolio, automatically translated. So way better engagement with not a lot of fuss, all coming through a really integrated app. So that's Toddle in short. And if that piqued your interest, I really would love to connect with you farther. If you are working part of the leadership team at your school, thinking about how to make MYP work a little better at your school, I would really love a chance to talk to you. And I'll probably follow up with you all with an email after the session. But thank you so much for sticking around during your break. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your sessions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brady. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate O'Connell, and I'm excited to welcome Chris Hayden here today. Some of you may know me. I am a workshop leader, educational consultant, trainer, workshop, anything education, you got me, all right? And I currently work in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, so I'm very close to Indonesia, and I am a head of school. And I love doing these moderation sessions for Toddle because I always learn so much and I'm inspired to go away and do something new in my practice. So I am sure that if you participate and listen, you will be inspired too. So we just listened to Vicki Harvey on belonging, inclusion, UDL, very inspiring. And now Chris Hayden is an experienced curriculum coordinator, senior leadership team member, accreditation lead, subject leader, and curriculum specialist with over 20 years of experience in secondary and higher education. He embraces design thinking, love the design thinking, and self-directed learning. So we're going to learn with Chris today. He's spent over 10 years working in international schools in Indonesia, and most recently served as the MYP coordinator at Cinemas World Academy. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Christopher Hayden.
All right, thanks so much, Kate. Just checking, can everyone hear me and see my screen okay? Yeah? All
Great.
right. Yeah, welcome everyone. Selamat siang. Nama aku Chris Hayden. Aku bisa bahasa Indonesia sedikit, tapi bahasa Inggris saya lebih lengkap. Jadi I'm going to use English today, and we have Chandra, who's actually providing some translation services. Yeah, wonderful to be with you all here today. This is kind of an overview of our talk. Going to be focusing on personal project, but taking more of a deep dive, I think, into kind of like the things that are underlying the personal project. One thing that we have to supplement or to want to make this, want to make sure that people are actually engaged in doing things. We have a Miro board here. And so I think, copy link, yeah, I think if I paste this into the chat, oops, everyone. Yeah, I think if I paste that into the chat, is everyone able to access that? If you click on the link there in the chat, everyone see that? So we will have some activities and things where you'll be working on the Miro board. If you've never used Miro, it's pretty easy. It will only take 100 people, I believe, at one time, but I think that's okay given the number of participants that we have. The idea is that we have these kind of like workbook type situations, right? Where you'll be in breakout rooms and you'll be working on one of these one of the aspects in the task. It'll be clear as we work through this. And then we have some slide information there pasted. So just to make sure everybody is able to access that early on. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So yeah, the plan for the talk today, we're going to look at some background on personal project, which is a core element of the middle years program. Talk about capstone experiences, and then dive deep into self-directed learning, and really hoping that you can take some of these tools home to your context, to your schools, and kind of initiate or be agents of change through the personal project. If you do the personal project, if you're an MYP school, or if you're not an MYP school yet or at all, right? There's still a lot of transferable ideas here and approaches. All right, so yeah, the background, just want to dive into for a moment the background and the history of the middle years program, so that we can kind of get an idea of the specialness and the place that the personal project holds in the middle years program. So you can see here, these are a couple of quotes from a document called The History of the MYP, which is really interesting. You often think, why is it this way? If you're an MYP teacher, why is it that way? And this document helps you kind of see the progression, right, in the development of these ideas. So back in actually before this, in the 80s, the International Schools Association, which is where the middle years program and other IB programs actually like grew out of, it was this idea of placing importance on the appreciation of the whole student's personality and potential, right, as measured by this independent project is what they called it, right? And so that kind of evolved in the first iteration or some of the early iterations of the middle years program to be called the personal project, right? And so the idea you can see in these curriculum models, right? They look similar to the one that if you're at an MYP school, you probably have seen, or I hope you've seen, right? That has that kind of learner in the center, right? And the person who's developing in the white and the dark blue and light blue, right, in the center there. In earlier kind of versions of the middle years program curriculum framework, right, it was the personal project, right, that was seen as kind of, or still is, I would argue, right, really connected to that individual person, right? So the idea is that students are applying what they've learned about the interconnection of their different subjects and learning, and what they called areas of interaction at that time. And so currently, approaches to learning, for example, sustainability focus, well-being, all of those are essentially areas of interaction, or what they called areas of interaction back then. So another quote here, right? This is the middle years program was really born out of kind of a resistance to existing models that focused overly focused maybe on the importance of exams and kind of rote learning, right? So here's a quote from a gentleman named Selden. The lifeblood of schools has become choked by a regime that frog marches children through exam after exam, leaving them without the skills needed to get on in the world, right? So in many ways, the middle years program and the personal project, which is a core element of that, is coming out of kind of a response to these existing practices, right, that were heavily exam-based and focused on what you might call rote learning or preparation for the exam, right? So for both teachers and students, right, originality of thought, creativity, thinking skills, and personal initiative they felt were being sacrificed on the altar of rote learning and instruction on how to pass exams, right? So it's this idea that those are, existing kind of maybe because they're historically been important, or because of the value that's perceived by the public and things like that, but those aren't actually doing necessarily students, right, the services that we want to do for them, right? So the idea is essentially that there's this gap, right? There's this gap between those existing approaches, right, that were heavily exam-based and focused on what you might call rote learning, and what we kind of need to do to support students in the future. And so Scott McLeod, if you've ever been to his website, it's a really, really interesting website. It's called Dangerously Irrelevant. And he actually took that from another person who commented that today's education is becoming dangerously irrelevant, in the sense that it's not connecting with the skills and the attitudes and the competencies and the all of those things that kind of we think that students need in what's sometimes called like a VUCA future, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, all of that kind of stuff. So just on the top right there, right, you can see the global top 5 skills from 2025 out of a World Economic Forum report. Yeah, analytical thinking, innovation, right? Active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, right? Critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality, initiative, right? All of those things are difficult or challenging to assess in certain formats, right? They might require, or you might argue that they require a slightly different approach, right, to support them. Oops. Yeah, so another bit of background on the personal project in particular, right? Essentially, we can think of it as the middle years program signature consolidation of learning, right? It is essentially, or it is a capstone learning event, and we'll talk more about that. It's a performance assessment, right? That's embedded, or as performance assessments often are, right, embedded in real world contexts. It involves the integration of understanding across curriculum, and it definitely is focused on self-directed learning. And in this little graph, just shown the numbers of students who are enrolled in the May 2023 IB external examinations to put things in perspective, right? You might think of the personal project as, you know, relatively minor in comparison to the other DP programs. Definitely there are fewer MYP schools than DP schools, right? But in terms of the numbers, almost 100,000 students are enrolled in the personal project each year. That's more than the number of students who enrolled in DP theory of knowledge, right? Just a couple, there are about 130,000 students who were taking one of the Group 4 sciences, right? So all of the Group 4 science registrations for the diploma program, and then language and literature, there are about 134,000. So it is comparable in terms of like the impact and the number of students that are actually engaged in it. And yeah, I will tell you about a little, as maybe like a little activator, a little kind of thought prompter. I live here in Beijing. I lived in Indonesia for 12 or 13 years. I forget. My family is Indonesian, and we were definitely not used to the cold. Moving here to Beijing in China, we have snow, we have freezing. And so I thought to myself, I wonder if I could make a little ice hockey rink on the side of my house. When I was younger, I played ice hockey and I really enjoyed it. But I also grew up in Southern California, where we didn't have any freezing weathers, and just doing this kind of project wasn't possible. So this last winter, I decided that I was going to try and make a little ice rink on the side of my house. There's a little GIF of me actually using it, and there are my children, who we had a couple of skates on it. It was tiny. It was really, really small. But as a initial kind of dive into the personal project, and given that we know that it's a capstone learning event, we know that it's a performance assessment, we know that it integrates diverse understandings, and that it involves self-directed learning, I'm wondering if you all could consider this to be a personal project, and maybe why or why not. So if you want to toss your ideas into the chat. So is my example here of making a little mini rink or a mini ice rink, is that a personal project? Why or why not? If you want to throw your ideas into the chat. Thanks, Kate. Yeah. So what do you think? Asking you to. Okay, so Jody says yes. So why?
anything personal and which helps in your learning
Okay. All right. So
and
it's it's
reach to it. Yes. Connect. Thank
okay.
you.
All right. Thanks, Jody. Good to see you again.
Same
Yeah.
here.
So Putri asked, are there any success criteria? Okay. So I mean, I guess aside from being able to skate on this thing, I didn't really establish any success criteria. I wanted to use like a pretty good chunk of space. Okay, so it allowed me to grow. Yeah, I definitely had never done it before, and I learned a lot about it. You could buy these large plastic liners, and they were kind of expensive, and I thought, oh, I'll just use plastic bags. That cost me a lot of time and a lot of frustration. Going back and reflecting, I think that would have been a much better kind of design. So Simon says yes, because it's enriching for me and others. There are comments from Christo about ATL skills. It's relating to personal passion. Lloyd says that it's a personal project minus the report, which is a good comment. I didn't write a report on it, but it's personally relevant. Yeah, if you want to look at these examples here, right? Is it an example of a capstone learning event? Is it a performance assessment? Did it integrate diverse understanding? Was it self-directed? Any other ideas? All right. Well, we can, yeah, just the point of this is one, to show off my personal project as I saw it kind of, but also just to get you thinking about what does actually make up a personal project in the MYP sense. So we mentioned that there are a couple of features, right, related to personal project. One of them, we described it as a capstone experience, right? And so when we think of a capstone experience, the metaphor is that in certain structures, right, we have a stone, sometimes it's called a center stone or things like that, that basically keeps all of the other elements of the structure involved, or I'm sorry, supported, right? So different ways of defining capstone experiences, right? We could talk about like their importance in somebody's life or education. We could talk about their purpose. Sometimes they're viewed as like social, from a social perspective, as kind of like rites of passage. They confer status. We could think about them from the impacts on students, right? Do they, promote creativity, motivation, self-direction, all of that kind of good stuff. And then here's just maybe like a conceptual model for how these different elements of education, right, might fit into this capstone kind of idea. From my school and others like IB is also promoting this idea, and others, colleagues, really focusing on this idea of flourishing, right, as kind of like a key goal of education, right? Things that we want for students, not just mastering content, not just developing certain skills. We want them to flourish, right, and engage with the world through that flourishing, right? So you could see here, I mean, this would be maybe on either side of this little structure, but attitude, sense of self, skills, subject knowledge, engagement, identity, all of those things are building up, and then we have this capstone experience that holds it all together. So yeah, capstone experiences have students as active participants in learning, right? They're definitely applications of knowledge to real life. As we mentioned before, right? This idea of integrating understanding and integrating learning across subjects, providing opportunities to bridge theory with practice, right? So what we might be learning from a theoretical standpoint, how does that connect with things that we're actually doing? Certainly tied to higher order thinking skills, creative thinking skills, critical thinking skills, right? Problem solving, transfer, right? In the sense that you're transferring understanding to this novel situation. They tend to be long-term project-based. They involve student choice, but that doesn't mean that the teacher is not guiding or present, right? So there's kind of an idea, sometimes agency and autonomy maybe are confused, right? And when we think of agency, we're thinking about giving students voice, choice, that kind of thing. Autonomy is basically, letting someone do whatever they want to do, and that's not what this kind of choice is, right? So it's a supported choice, right? And then it's interestingly to note, or important to note, that they're challenging to assess, but I would say that this is like part of all authentic learning, right? And also note that just because something is easy to assess doesn't necessarily correlate to its value, right? So often the most challenging things to assess are the most valuable parts of educational experiences, right? So here's a little quote, right? So students will enter a workforce in which they will not be judged by their performance. They'll be evaluated not only on their outcomes, but also on their collaborative, negotiating, planning, and organizational skills, right? And so it's, when you think about capstone experiences, maybe you've done like an advanced degree, right? And you've presented your dissertation or your thesis or whatever to a panel. There's all sorts of authentic negotiation, collaboration, right? That you don't really get in other, well, potentially you don't get them in other classroom kind of experiences, other kind of learning experiences, right? So they're authentic in the sense that they require, right, collaboration with teachers, right? They require potentially collaboration with mentors, right? And those could be both inside and outside of school. You're negotiating ideas, right? Negotiating approaches, deciding on approaches. And then essentially, right, there's a lot of freedom that requires careful negotiation and essential skills, right? All right, so we have a little activity here. If you go to the Miro, right, we would like you in breakout rooms to basically try and answer these two parts. And I apologize, you're probably wondering why in that introduction slide there was a cross section of an orange. It was meant to be like a symbol for this, which is also a Project Zero thinking routine, right, of peeling the fruit. So this idea that we're looking at something from the outside and then trying to move in and make connections and understand what this thing is really about. So that's what the metaphor is that refers to, or that's being referred to here. So the idea is that, one, if you see that first box, your breakout room will be your group number room. So for example, if you're in breakout room 1, then you'll be in group 1. Number 1, discuss with your peers and try and add some thoughts about what are the visible components of personal project, right? And again, this is not, the idea is not to get this right or to, find the correct answer. We're just trying to connect with what you know about the personal project, or, ideas that you have. What do you see as like the most visible parts of the personal project, right? And then as a second step in this, we're going to consider, in your own context or school, whatever you want to call it, how would a capstone experience impact student learning? And you could think about how it might impact learning, the community, right? Professional practice. So we're going to spend maybe, let's say, 5 or 6 minutes trying to explore these two areas in breakout rooms. So Toddle team, or can I do breakout rooms?
Hey, Chris, yeah, I've got the
Hey.
breakout rooms set up.
Awesome.
Just wanted to double check if they needed to be in English and Bahasa specific groups.
That's a good question. I think it's okay because if you're speaking English, I bet you have some Bahasa Indonesia capacity. We can always quickly check and see if there's anybody who's really struggling.
Yeah, I've created multiple rooms of English and Bahasa, depending on 4 to 5 people in each room.
Okay.
I'll just open all rooms, and what we did previously in the last session, we can continue here as well.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and if you have questions about what we're meant to be doing here, connecting with peers, working through boxes 1 and 2, your breakout room is your kind of like Miro board group. Some of the slides, well, no, not for this actually, sorry. Any questions or help that's needed right now by anyone? Okay.
Does anyone need help getting into a breakout room? Usually we see everybody disappear, but I still see a few participants. Don't hesitate to reach out and just say, shoot me into a room.
Thanks, Kate.
Iga, do you need help? No, you're good. Okay. Thank you. I love the mural board, Chris.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Yeah, Miro's awesome, right?
I just wish I use it for compass training, but I haven't learned how to set it up. Did you set this up yourself?
Yeah, it's super easy. It's just like a Word document or yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's awesome.
I did, yeah, someone showed me how to do it. I didn't know how. 27 unassigned participants. Not sure if
Do you want me to throw them in breakout rooms?
that'd be great if you don't mind, Kate. Thanks.
Yep, not a problem.
You're managing those because I don't think I have access to them, right?
Yep. I mean, I don't know if you do, but why not? You're doing all the heavy lifting and I'm
Thanks.
here
Yeah.
to support.
Good to see you again. I think we met in Thailand, right? A couple months ago.
I was just wondering. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
didn't recognize your name, but when I saw you, I was like, oh, Kate, I remember
Yeah.
Kate.
Yeah, same with me. I didn't recognize your
Yeah.
name, but now, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm super excited. I got asked to do this last minute and it's
Oh, wow.
just awesome.
Awesome. Yeah.
So just as we're talking, I'm throwing people in
Thanks so much.
to rooms. And I was joking around when we introduced Vicky that I wish this had been a week before because my daughter just turned in her personal project.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
She did it completely independently, did not need my assistance at
Wow.
all.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So I felt like I let her down because I should have been more involved. But in the end, really what I'm hearing from you is it's got to be.
Yeah, for sure. It's yeah. I mean, we're there to support. I mean, her teachers are her mentor and the coordinator there, I'm sure we're supporting them, but yeah.
I almost just threw you into a breakout room.
Oops, yeah. I'll pop into these and just see if they have any clarifying questions or if there's a discussion. Looks like it's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I can't see the breakout rooms. I apologize. Now it was in the 3 dots on the side. I can help.
I think that some people want the recording and they come on and
Yeah, yeah.
they
Just watch
go
later.
away.
Yeah. Right. All right, I'll just jump into some of these rooms and see if anybody needs any help or wants to talk. Yeah.
Great. Hi, Tendra, how are you?
Kate, 1 minute left to close these rooms. I think Chris said 5 to 6 minutes, right?
Yeah, I think do you want to just go a little bit longer? Because he just got into the rooms.
Yeah. Okay,
And
then I'll give it 1 more minute.
yeah,
Okay.
and I see that they haven't really started. They're just starting the activity.
Okay. So then how long do you suggest we wait for before we close?
I would give it another 3 minutes. I'll
Okay.
make an announcement to say, like, if you haven't started, get started, 3 more minutes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. 2 minutes are up, Kate. I'll just close the room and we'll give them 1 minute to get back.
Okay, at least they got started. How'd that go? How's everybody doing?
Yeah, different. Some rooms are very silent. Some are having issues or just it's foreign to them. I'll do like a little demo as well, maybe.
I think that would be a great way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Chandra. I should have maybe slowed down and demoed that.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Hey all. Yeah, thanks so much. I'll just do a quick demo of the Miro and how that works. Apologies if that was not as user-friendly as I thought it could be, or so the idea is that each of these kind of like rectangular spaces is for a breakout room. You can zoom in and out with your 2 fingers on the trackpad, right? Or you can do like command plus, command minus, right? Or if you have like a mouse that has a little scrolly thing. The idea is that there are a bunch of different ways that you can interact with this. The sticky notes are like really nice because they become kind of like it's a sticky note, right? A Post-it. And so I have a bunch of them copied and pasted here that you can use directly. You can also click over here on the right here to the sticky note and click one there and then put it on the space, right, that we're working on. Now it looks really, really small here, but I'm going to zoom way in, right? And right, I'm typing things into this. Then when I make the Post-it smaller or larger, right, it can basically fit that space really easily, right? So let's say, you had 100 Post-it notes. Okay, they're not going to fit that size, but we can shrink them down. And then when you come back, right, you can make it larger to see it. Wasn't imagining that there would be 100 Post-it notes on any of these, but are there any specific questions about how to use this thing? Okay, if you do, just throw them in the chat. The idea is that you'll have access to this Miro forever. So, the things that you talked about with your group or the things that you were thinking or that you added to the Miro, right? You can take those away with you. And plus you have access to other groups' work as well, right? So, you're like, gosh, I wonder what this one is all about. Let me see what this other group wrote there, right? So it's a really nice collaboration tool. But apologies, yeah, it's maybe a little bit confusing. Yeah.
And Chris, they're asking for the link. Can you share the Miro link?
Oh, yeah.
Did. Sandra, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chandra. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And so if you haven't used Miro before, just while Chris is moving into his slideshow, it's a great tool. And like, maybe if you didn't learn the whole, you've got Chris has given you a little bit of a, what do we say? Provocation.
Template, yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Into a new tool that you can use with your students.
Yeah, for sure. It's super, super user friendly. It's free. There are different like account levels you can get, but the basic stuff is free. Yeah, really, really nice. All right. So yeah, hopefully, you have wrapped your head a little bit around kind of like a capstone experience, right? And what we mean by that when we refer to that. Definitely we're saying that a capstone experience is an essential aspect of the personal project, right? It is a capstone experience. It's the largest externally moderated capstone experience in the world, right? With over almost 100,000 students completing this and then submitting their work to the IB for moderation, right? Through the personal project. So another aspect was an interesting chatting with Kate about, as a parent and myself as well as a parent, right? You start to see and notice things in your children and our students as teachers, but this idea of self-directed learning. And this is perhaps less emphasized, challenging, I would say. I don't think, like when I went to Teachers College, like we talked about agency and things like this, but the personal project really focuses squarely on self-directed learning, right? And here's a definition of self-directed learning, right? So it's this process through which students take initiative, right? And that's with or without the help of others. So maybe the big, what do you call it? The big issue that some people have is they assume that self-directed learning is like me hands off, like, okay, kids, go ahead. I'm just going to sit here and watch you, when that's not what it's about, right? It's a unique set of skills to teach students to support self-directed learning, right? It's different perhaps than a very teacher-directed approach, right? But essentially, right, we want students to be able to take initiative, right, with or without the help of others. And what do we want them to be able to do? We want them to be able to diagnose their learning needs, their own learning needs, right? To formulate learning goals for themselves, to find and identify resources for learning, and then choose and implementing, right, appropriate learning strategies, and also be able to evaluate their learning outcomes, right? So one idea related to this is the locus of control, right? So I could teach, for example, biology or some subject or whatever, and have a student do very well in an exam, but perhaps not give them much control, right? And the locus of control would perhaps be on myself as the teacher, right? Dictating to them every step of the way, right? So exams, I mean, when we think about our best students, however we want to define those, often they're students that are very skilled in self-directed learning, right? And so people have thought about what makes a self-directed learner effective. There's a really great group at the the Institute for Self-Directed Learning, and the Forest School, and some people here at my school. And they've kind of boiled it down to these 4 essential characteristics, right? So we're thinking about a desire to learn, right? Which is actually pretty. How do you give someone a desire to learn, or how do you support their desire to learn? That's really challenging, right? Resourcefulness, initiative, and persistence, and we'll just look at each one of those for a moment. But yeah, the idea is that learners are choosing the process, content, skills, learning pathways, and outcomes of learning with guidance, accountability, and support of others. So we're trying to emphasize that self-directed learning does not make the teacher's role less important. It actually makes it much more important, but perhaps in a different way than if we're trying to create dependent learners, or learners who are not being trained to be self-directed, right? We think about this in the context of an interdependent community of peers, trained educators, and caring adults, right? So again, we're trying to hammer home this idea that self-directed learning is not teachers hands off. It's a different kind of support, right, to develop those skills. All right, so we can look at each of these in just a little bit more detail. Number 1, the desire to learn, right? So we can think about, how do we develop a desire to learn in students? It's actually, when you think about it, that's challenging, right? I could teach someone math, or I could teach them how to structure an essay or something like that, but how do you actually, impact someone's desire to learn, right? Some of the research and people have written about this, right? That someone's desire to learn essentially depends on their background, right? Their experience and the context, right? So their perception of their place in the world, right? So, we inherit this from our families, from our cultures, right? Beliefs about our identity, right? I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. I'm this, I'm that, right? And then there are a bunch of abilities, right? So how well are students or people able to express thoughts, goals, and needs, right? How well or how able are they to make informed decisions and choose between options? And then how effective are they at communicating openly and engaging with others, right? All of these things, right, are applied, let's say, to, how you solve problems as they arise.
Chris, can I interrupt you quickly? There's a
Please.
great question in the chat from Iga. What is the difference between self-directed learning and self-regulated learners?
Oh, I think they're essentially the same. Well, so I would say no, self-regulating learning, I think, is a part of self-directed learning. So regulating your own learning is like an element of self-direction. But you could imagine if I or you or whoever, somebody told someone to learn something, right? They might be really good at regulating their learning of that, but they wouldn't necessarily have any say in what they're learning, if that makes sense.
And if I can use your example, you were definitely a self-directed learner when you made your ice hockey
Sure.
outside your house,
Right.
but you could have been so frustrated you gave up because of the weather or whatever. And that self-regulation, I think, goes to the previous presentation with Vicki Gardner, is just like being able to regulate yourself so that you can stay self-directed.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Kate. Yeah. Yeah, so it's not a simple kind of like just do it. There are a bunch of different elements, and that's kind of what we're trying to explore here. But yeah, really nice observation. Thanks. So learner resourcefulness. So kind of building on that like idea. How likely are learners to choose learning over other activities? This is, you think about like taking, what's the expression? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. If we're saying that students should have a say in what they want to learn, doesn't mean that we're not there, but all of a sudden we have a whole new kind of whole new challenge, right? It's not just, getting them seated in seats and paying attention. We want them to be involved in making decisions, right? To choose learning over other potential activities, right? And so, Carr in 1999, right, talking about deferring gratification, right? So when we choose learning over other more pleasurable activities, like scrolling through, like my daughters and myself as well, right? Like you want to scroll through through those YouTube clips or whatever. Conflict resolution, right? How do you kind of prioritize learning when it's conflicting with other activities? Preparing for the future orientation, planning, evaluating alternatives, right? Identifying alternative strategies, anticipating consequences, right? All of these are aspects of learner resourcefulness, right? And this idea that intentionality, it's this intentionality that follows motivation, right? So we could almost think of, right, the desire to learn perhaps as motivation, and now learner resourcefulness, as Kate mentioned there, right, is kind of, how do you actually make sense or effectively achieve your goal? Learner initiative, right? So a lot of interesting ideas about where initiative comes from. Definitely we can think about these kind of 5 components, right? So goal directedness. So how good are we at setting long and short-term goals, measuring our progress toward them, and making revisions if things don't go the way we planned? An action orientation. So, you see an opportunity, are you going to act on it? Overcoming obstacles, taking an active approach, right, to realizing agency. You could think about it that way, and taking responsibility. And then this idea of being a self-starter or self-starting, right? So this ability to initiate learning. And so a big idea here is that all of these specific skills, attitudes, and habits can be taught, right? So it's not something, often you think about, oh, well, they're just not a self-directed learner. The idea is that all students, all people have the capacity to be self-directed learners, and often that's correlated with success, however you want to measure that, right? So the idea is not that self-directed learning is for some or for those few who can. It's that it's a learnable set of skills, competencies, attitudes, whatever you want to call them. And our role as educators is to prepare students to be self-directed learners. So another one here, learner persistence, right? Seeing things to their fruition. This is exactly what Kate was talking about, right? So their volition, right? Intentions versus motivations, right? Self-regulation, orienting thoughts, feelings, and actions towards a learning goal, and then maintaining the focus on that goal. So the last thing before we jump into another little activity, self-directed learning doesn't remove the role of the teacher at all. On the contrary, it makes the teacher's role even more crucial. It takes unique skills and opportunities to shepherd children to learn independently, right? So the challenge is perhaps greater because in most contexts we have less experience supporting self-directed learning. I would argue that most, if not many, or many, if not most, kind of traditional education paradigms or systems are highly teacher-directed, right? And so what we're trying to do is shift teachers to be designers and facilitators of environments that promote deep learning, right? So again, we're not saying that self-directed learning, what we're saying is that self-directed learning requires unique approaches from teachers. It's something that, and schools, it's something that can be developed in all people, right? So self-directed learning is not for some kind of like privileged few. Though if you look across maybe landscapes of education systems, often the best schools, right, will realize this and help students kind of develop these characteristics, right? All right, so we have another little breakout room activity. This one hopefully will be fun. So we'd like you to draw or use images. You can upload images in Miro with that little upload button. If you click on the pen, you can actually draw a picture on the page. But one person in your breakout room, if they could draw what you think a self-directed learner looks like, and we've copied and pasted the slides that describe those 4 characteristics for your reference on the Miro. Yeah, so I can open up. Are there any questions or things that people want to discuss before we jump into the breakout rooms? Okay. All right, I will stop sharing and oops. Okay, I think the breakout rooms are open.
And what you do is you go down to more and you can see breakout room and then
Yeah.
you can join. And I think everybody's got it because they're disappearing.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah. And I think while they're, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to run to the bathroom really quick.
I'm sorry. Yeah, of course, of course.
Be right. And for Ekta's information, how long do you want this breakout session? So you have 27 minutes.
Yeah, maybe 5 minutes.
Do you think that's enough? 5 minutes? Okay, so Ekta, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Chris, how's everything going in the breakout rooms? Oh, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, good. I just joined one. I'm going to pop into one more and just see how they're doing.
Okay, great.
Hey, Kate and Chris, I'm closing the room, so they'll have 1 minute to get back to the main room now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there was one that was very quiet, but I heard some interesting conversations in some of them.
Yeah, I don't know why sometimes you can see the microphone to see if
Oh,
there's.
Yeah, I don't see that here. Yeah.
Oh.
Hmm.
So it's 22 minutes left and you might want to leave some time for question and answers.
Yeah. All right. All right. 8 seconds.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Please feel free to leave your camera on so we can see you and connect with you.
All right. Hey, everybody. Yeah, welcome back. So, we hopefully some of the conversations I heard were interesting. People are focused on, you know, what aspects make actually a self-directed learner and things like that. We can just briefly maybe mention kind of like the why. So some of you might be thinking, yeah, okay, but you know, why is this so important? Mention this idea of flourishing, right, as a goal of education. Different people have different goals in terms of education, but flourishing is definitely a good one. The IB, some of the work that's going with the enhancing the MYP and the new iterations that are coming out pretty soon have definitely embraced this idea of flourishing, right? And so it kind of broadens the vision for what it means to be successful, right? It's not just about grades. It's not just about this. What we want are empowered, or humans that are empowered to follow their passions and discover their calling and interact with the world, right? Engage with the world, right? This is what we mean by flourishing. And if we don't give students opportunities to develop their capacity for self-directed learning, it's hard to imagine that they could realize their potential, right? In that respect. Another big idea here is this idea of developing independent learners, right? And if you start to think about experiences that you've had or reflect on experiences that you've had with students, it's very easy to class them into one of these two categories, right? You know, using strategies versus can't completing a task without strategies or guidance from the teacher, right? We're not saying that there might be certain parts, obviously, of instruction or teaching that would require teacher support, but we're recognizing that in being an independent learner is kind of the end goal, the big goal that we want, right? In terms of students, right? We can think about big impacts on school systems and some of these barriers that are like existing that make it difficult in some contexts or some ways. Currently, many systems are set up in terms of accountability for administrative efficiency. This idea of fostering connection or compliance. the idea of curriculum and self-directed learning as supporting equity, right, rather than reproducing inequality or inequities. And then deficit ideologies about fixing people versus designing environments that are accessible and that support learning and development, right? So we can just chat for a moment about, you know, systemic racism, colonialistic ideologies, deficit ideologies. These are things that I've found myself thinking, right, in, you know, at one time or another, classifying students into groups, right, or saying, you know, well, they just lack motivation, they just this. Assignment of intelligence or ability, right? This student is not capable, or this student is capable, right? Assumptions of character and things like this. All of these are challenges, right? And often they're perpetuated by elements of our cultures or elements of our systems, right? They're self-perpetuated, right? And there are a lot of examples of this in the United States, in particular, right? So in part, right, self-directed learning is meant to challenge and overcome some of those systematic barriers, right? Paulo Freire is a great example of like a visionary in terms of the role of education, right? So he describes education as the practice of freedom, or rather he says that they're basically education can either be an instrument to, as he says here, facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, right? Or it becomes the practice of freedom, right? The means by which we deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of our world, right? So self-directed learning is definitely more aligned with his view of education, right? So if you want to just pop in the chat, we've talked about a couple of different elements. Any of these that are really resonating with you, yeah, you could take a screenshot or just as you think about them. The last thing that we'll talk about is kind of taking some of these examples home, perhaps to your context, right? So when we think about the personal project, I would say, in my experience, particularly early on, it was seen as kind of like, oh, it's this little nice kind of add-on thing, right, that you do in your school. But really, it's meant to be kind of this central element, right? In terms of implementing and developing self-directed learning in our schools, right? There have been a couple of nice kind of like landscape analyses where they look at schools, the things that schools are doing across the world, right? And so pulled out a couple of elements that you might take away to your school when you go home or go back to your context and think about reimagining education there, right? So in terms of curricula, right? So definitely we want to vary what schools that are implementing self-directed learning. There's a variation in degree in terms of mandatory versus non-mandatory learning, right? They have personalized learning pathways, right? Long-term project-based endeavors that are interdisciplinary, right? And so when we think about, for example, IDUs in the middle years program, you think about what's the value of this? Well, it's really square. It's aimed at these kinds of things, right? So it's not just this, oh, here's another subject, interdisciplinary unit. Here's another subject, personal project, or another project. They're all meant to support these kinds of elements, right? So in terms of assessment, right, we think about assessment determines prior knowledge, demonstrates growth, and informs future steps, right? So as a goal of assessment, right? Schools that are implementing self-directed learning well tend to have a wider range of learner outcomes that are assessed. So not just, for example, knowledge and understanding, and you have things like basically essentially approaches to learning skills, right? Readiness for self-direction. You know, are students able to monitor their learning? The development of purpose, right? There are some really cool examples of different assessments that people have developed. The Flourish assessment is actually really interested if you want to have a look at that. And then the Mastery Transcript Consortium is even bigger, which looks at kind of alternative transcript structures, right? And the impacts that they would have on the way that we assess and plan learning environments, right? So a third area is schedules and routines, right? So schools that are supporting self-directed learning are incorporated kind of non-mandatory schedule elements, right? That give students opportunity to make informed decisions about how to use their time, flexible time, asynchronous instructional strategies. At my school here, and it's actually becoming more common, we have, we call it day 9. And so there's one day of a 9-day cycle where students are basically able to choose from almost anything. Well, it's a set of scaffolded experiences, but they're able to choose from that list or come up with their own, right? Heard about things at different schools like mini-mesters, right? Like, you know, short week-long periods where students are given a lot of choice to decide on what they want to learn, right? Another aspect of this is shifting how we view our roles as adults, as teachers, right? So this shift from a hierarchical view of adults as learners, as leaders rather, to being kind of guides and facilitators, advisors, right? We're helpers, not judges, right? And so this, we're not the, you know, the masters holding all the knowledge. We're coaches, right? We're trying to help students in this framework, right, achieve their goals, right? And so what we want are students to become engaged citizens, and through that support collaboration. It's a challenge, right? Because in this role, we have to make decisions about whether or not a student is really not able to do something, and in which case they need our help, or whether they're trying to go for this kind of easy out, right? And asking us to take responsibility for what we hope they can begin to accept as their responsibility, right? Yeah, we educators, we should be engaging in instructional conversations about learning process and goal setting, right? As a part of this new role. So the community in schools, so in schools that are doing this really well, we see kind of a stronger leveraging of collaboration and opportunities, right, for learning within the community. And overall, this idea that holistic development is kind of at the center of all this. So yeah, community partnerships, right? We definitely are trying to recognize the idea that the school walls are not where the learning ends, right? Communities are learning spaces. And the nice thing about communities is that they're authentic, right? And so students are applying, right, what they learn in real contexts. Schools that are doing this well have opened up learning to include internships, apprenticeships, you know, nature-based learning, outdoor-based learning, all of these really great experiential learning kind of elements. All right, so the last thing that we're asking you all to do is to go to our Miro, and to use your favorite AI tool. Consider these 6 areas and try and ask, you can ask it to do that, but basically, you know, the prompt that you tell it will have a big impact on what it spits out. To try and develop a vision statement that captures at your context, what would you like to see in terms of those structures? In terms of implementing self-directed learning, considering those different structural elements. So you could choose one of them to kind of dive deep. You could choose multiple areas, right, and put them together. We'll kind of leave that up to you, but we'd like you to use an AI tool to craft like a vision statement, right? Something that that's not in place right now, perhaps, but that you could imagine for the future to be in place. Okay, so we will, any questions? All right, so yeah, we'll send everyone back into the breakout rooms. And we are on the portion of the Miro that talks about vision. I think it's just below the fruit. At the very bottom, sorry, your vision statement, right? Yeah, so you should see the breakout room options. And we'll just do this for a couple minutes, for 5 minutes.
Sure. Chris, there are a few comments, and I think they're
thank
talking about memorization and remembering. And so you might, I don't know, in the last 5 minutes, like to.
Yeah. We only have like 5 minutes left. Is that right, Kate?
Yeah, that's correct. Exactly.
All right. Yeah. I don't know. Can you like close the breakout rooms right now? Maybe just bring.
Yes.
Oh, I
Closing.
can. Okay.
We ran out of time.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. I think we're all back. Oh,
Yeah.
27 seconds. Yeah. Another 5 seconds or so, and everyone will be back. All right. I think everyone is back with us. Welcome back. Yeah, so just we just have a couple of minutes left. Some conversations going on in the chat, maybe spark some interest. It was a question about, as I interpret it, kind of like the role of memory in learning, maybe. So I guess self-directed learning does not say anything about the value of memorization, right? Might be very, very important. It's just saying that it's putting a student in a position to determine or to train them or give them the ability to determine whether or not that's important or not. So in learning language subjects like English lessons, the composition of rote learning versus critical thinking and other methods, there are things that you definitely have to memorize, right? Your times tables or, vocabulary words. In terms of value, right? One idea is related to transfer and the the value of what you're memorizing essentially in the future, right? So how certain are you that what a student memorized will be used or important in the future, right? In many cases, we don't actually know whether that will or will not be important. And so the idea is to teach things that are transferable, right? So rather than focusing on memorizing something, teaching them how to memorize or how to approach and make choices about, you know, the tools and the things that they could use to memorize things if they want to memorize or need to memorize them. Were there other questions? We just have a couple minutes. And wanted to give time for anybody to chime in. All right. Well, so yeah, just kind of as a last thing, you will have access to the Miro board, so you can take some of these discussions perhaps and back to your contexts. Really was interested in this one. Yeah, so the Renaissance person, all of these different kind of things that they have to be able to do. Some really nice, interesting comments. Our vision is to foster a community committed to lifelong learning where individuals are empowered to become self-directed learners, pursue knowledge, and grow with passion and purpose. Guided by ethical principles and a sense of caring for others and the world around us, we strive to create a culture of empathy, integrity, and responsibility. Through continuous self-improvement and dedication to the well-being of all, we aim to cultivate a brighter future for ourselves and generations to come. Wow, that's really great. Yeah, so the last thing is just maybe to prompt some reflection on perhaps what you see the role of the personal project now. It's really aimed at promoting student engagement with the world around them, developing self-directed learning. I think you could easily take these next kind of 3 or 4 questions back to your communities and continue working on this. And hopefully it'll stimulate some change and some insight and thinking and things in your own context. So thanks so much. Really happy to keep conversations going with anybody who's interested. I can pop my email in the chat or something like that, or you can just find me on Twitter, or I can pop my email in there if you're interested through Toddle.
And there's one question for you, Chris. Miss Misael asks if you're related to Mr. Sterling.
Mr. Sterling? No, I don't know who that is. Who? No, Misael, do you want to explain, or who's Mr. Sterling? I don't know. Or maybe he left.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. No, I don't. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Misael. That's funny.
So when you close this Zoom invite, well, first, sorry, before I move on, let's thank Chris for his time today and his preparation in preparing this presentation. I know I learned a lot about the personal project, self-directed learning, and I am motivated to learn more. So thank you, Chris. There's a lot of gratitude for you in the chat. Thank you. And it was brilliant that you opened in Bahasa. How impressive. When you close this Zoom, you'll be prompted to give feedback, and this helps us to plan for free events and resources in the future. So we appreciate you for taking a minute to complete that feedback. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us again soon at one of our next events. Thank you.
Thanks all. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Chandra.
Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you.